This is Only the Strong Survive, a podcast powered by CarBahn Media, where we dive deep into the world of business, leadership, and innovation. I'm your host, Dan Kahn, and I'm honored to have you join us today. So, let's get ready to learn some survival skills together. Hi, everyone, and welcome to the latest episode of Only the Strong Survive, powered by CarBahn Media. Today, we have a true legend in the automotive world with us, Mr. Steve Dinan. If you're into performance cars, particularly German performance cars and BMWs, you know Steve and his name and his legacy. Steve built Dinan Engineering into one of the most well-known tuning brands in the world, and now he's started a new company, CarBahn Auto Works, which we're going to dive into today. So Steve, right off the bat, just thanks for joining us, and it's a privilege to have you on the show.
Thanks, I've enjoyed it. Known Dan for a long time, a great guy, so I always like hanging out with you.
Likewise. So some background for our listeners. You and I have worked together quite a bit over the years, like you said, and we worked together when you were at Dinan Engineering. And a story I've told some of our staff members is you and I talked on the phone a bunch of times before you first hired us. And my baptism into the Dinan world was I flew up to Morgan Hill to your old office and showed up and you had a Dinan M5 there and said, let's go for a ride. And I don't know how fast you went on that back road, but it felt like it was about $190 and scared the absolute crap out of me.
That's my normal mode. Everybody that rides me say nobody drives faster on public roads than me. Even the race car drivers that drive my professional racing team don't like riding with me on the highway. So
I spent a lot of time and a lot of high performance stuff, and I don't scare easily. And my hands were shaking when I got out of the car on that one. And we walked into your office and all your guys are like snickering as I'm like shaking and I walk by their offices. I'm like, okay, this is a normal thing here. That's cool.
Yeah, they used to call it the e-ticket ride at Dinan when customers would come in and they'd want to sample the product. And so I'd take them for a ride in one of our cars. And it was almost a guaranteed close when I took them around the block.
That's very cool. Let's start at the beginning, Steve. I think you have such a cool story. Can you tell everybody, kind of going back to the beginning, where was the idea for Dinan? And I mean, you started in the business when really German tuning wasn't really a common thing in this country yet, right?
No, I mean, I grew up in St. Louis, Missouri, and my father was an aerospace engineer at McDonnell Douglas, and I grew up on American hot rods. My first three cars were a 67 Hemi Charger, a 69 Hurst Olds, and a 74 54 Corvette Roadster. I went to the military. I got drafted during Vietnam, and when I got out, I went to college on the GI Bill. And while I was going to college, I got a day job at a BMW repair shop. And I went to college at night because I was a poor kid and I didn't have any money to go to school unless I paid for it myself. There was no student loans back in those days either. When I started working on the cars, I just fell in love with the fit and finish, the build quality, the way they handled it. We're talking a 77 320i, which is by today's standards not a fantastic car technologically, but given what it was up against, like 300D Mercedes and American cars in the 70s had gotten terrible because of all the emissions controls and they haven't figured them out yet. It was far and away the best car I'd ever been in. And so I worked for that repair shop for 2 years. And at the end of the 2 years, I'd saved up $5,000. And I asked the owner of the repair shop if I could stop doing car repair work and start making high performance parts. And I would literally let him make 90% of the money. I would take 10% and I would do all the work just because I wanted to do that instead, as long as I got to keep my salary. And he turned me down, probably one of his worst decisions. So I quit my job, went home with my $5,000 in my toolbox, and I started working on cars during the day, ordinary repair work, brake job, service work. And then on nights and weekends, I had a drafting table with one of those old L-shaped drafting arms, that moved around the table. Yep. And I would design parts and fabricate them and then start making them and selling them. And back in those days, there was no internet. So I sold them on these little postage stamp ads in the back of Car and Driver. And that was how I started the business, with $5,000 out of my garage at home in Cupertino, about a mile from Apple Computer.
Wow. There was something in the water back then in that area. There was a lot of stuff going on.
There was, yeah. And Apple was so small back then. And my wife actually worked there.
Really?
It's back in Apple II days. I mean, long time ago.
That's when Woz and Jobs were still kind of running the show.
No, I would go by on the way home from work and pick her up, and they'd literally be walking around the building. I didn't know who they were. Like Steve Jobs come up and say hi and shake your hand. And it was like, he's just a guy wearing blue jeans and Birkenstocks working on computers.
That's pretty cool. I had no idea. That's really neat. So back then, 320s were like you said, they were sophisticated compared to the American stuff, but they weren't really fast cars. So what were you doing back then with, the turbo kits, I guess, right?
Yeah. It's interesting is I liked the German quality. I liked the handling of cars, but I missed that big block American V8 power. So the first two things I made were a suspension kit and a turbo kit. I got to make 240 horsepower. I got into the 14 seconds in the quarter miles, which is, quick back in those days, not by modern standards. And the tire of choice back in those days was a CM36 Pirelli. I don't know if you remember those things, but
no,
it's free your time.
So when you're doing turbo kits for 4-cylinder BMWs, is this something like consumers are installing at home, or are you sending them to other shops? Like, who was the customer back then?
Well, I was lucky enough to start the business in Silicon Valley, and I didn't realize how lucky I was because there were so many high-tech companies starting and so much venture capital money and so many wealthy people that honestly, my first couple of years, all my customers were retail customers.
Oh, so they would bring you the car.
They would bring me the car and I would fabricate a turbo kit and put it on their car. And it was back in those days, it was like, one or two a month. It was not high volume, but I was able to make more money than I made as a mechanic. My first job as a mechanic, I was making $5.50 an hour when I started. When I left the place, and after 2 years, I was making $10 an hour.
That was actually pretty good money back then.
Yeah, it wasn't too bad. It was 1979, this was. My first year in business, I made $87,000 profit. So I was making $20,000 as a mechanic, $25,000. I went to $87,000 in the first year. So I go, wow, this is something to this, I literally bootstrapped from there. I dropped out of school. I never finished going to college. I worked 12 hours a day, 7 days a week. I would do car repair all week, Monday through Friday. And then on the weekends, I would develop and install high-performance parts. I operated out of my house for 7 months, and I rented an Arco gas station for 7 months. The stalls, because the guy who owned it didn't want to do car repair. He just wanted to pump gas. And so I rented 2 stalls. And then I finally got, after 17 months, got a 5,000 square foot building up in Mountain View. And that was when things really started to go. I had by that time, 3 employees, I think.
Wow. When did you start racing? When did that come into the picture?
Well, that's interesting too. I was always a streetcar guy and never really paid attention to racing. And my wife made the mistake on my 1976. Let's see. It was 3 years before I started this. She took me to a Formula 5000 race at Laguna Seca when Mario Andretti was doing a tune-up to go to F1 for Lotus in 77.
Well, that'd be a good race to go to.
Oh, he decimated the field. He was so good compared to the rest of the people. And there was a lot of good people there, like, Danny Sullivan, but he just crushed everyone. He was like a machine. He shifted and braked and turned into the same point every single lap. It was very impressive to watch, but I watched one car race and I fell in love with racing and said, that's what I want to do. And then when I moved into the Arco gas station, the guy who owned the gas station turned to be an old NASCAR driver. And he said, well, I'd like to go SCCA club racing. If I bought a BMW, would you help me? And I said, sure. So he shows up a week later with a 2002 GT2 SCCA race car. And it was pretty rough. So I rebuilt the entire car and we won the championship in the first season. We won 7 out of 9 races and set a track record at Laguna Seca and Sonoma, which was Sears Point back in those days. And that was my first year in racing as developing a car.
So really year one, you were already competing in motorsports. I didn't know that.
Yeah, I started the business in 79 and I won my first championship in 1980.
Wow. That's really wild. Okay, well, and we're going to get into racing in a little bit. You've got some pretty incredible credentials in the big boy racing leagues too. So I want to talk about that.
Yeah, we just won Indy a couple of weeks ago, by the way.
That's unbelievable. Yeah, we're going to talk about that because I also want to talk about Daytona. But before we get into all that, so you get into the 5,000 square foot office or building and things I'm assuming at that point are really cooking. You're starting to scale and you've got some room to grow. And so at what point do you wake up and look at Jan, your wife, and say, okay, like this is becoming a serious thing? Like, did it happen organically over time, or was it like a moment where you realized like, hey, we need to staff up and really grow this thing?
Well, she was working at Apple for the first year I started the business with the idea that if I failed, we could eat.
Okay, makes sense.
When I made $85,000 first year, which was what more than both of us made the year before, she quit her job and came to work, and she took accounting classes at a local junior college, and she did all the books, and she also ordered all the parts and was a receptionist. And so it was me and her. And I wound up hiring a guy who worked at the gas station pumping gas and trained to be a mechanic, another guy in high school that I used to ride motorcycles with to run errands. Wound up having a staff of 4. And the business just kept growing organically. And by 1986, 7 years later, we were doing $5.5 million a year, and we made $500,000 in 1986 profit.
Wow. So when you get to that point where you've got that kind of growth, especially that's big money back in the early to mid 80s.
Now, $500,000 was more than I'd ever dreamed of making a year. It was less than a 10% profit on $5.5 million in sales, but it was still a lot of money. And I was spending literally half the money would make on developing new parts, and I was taking on the other half.
That's pretty good. Certainly your engineering prowess and your ability to kind of squeeze performance out of a vehicle is I think, probably a cornerstone of what you've built. But there's also a lot of marketing going on. Is that something that started from square one, or is that something by the time even you and I met, you were already a machine. I mean, you were getting lightning lap invites and you're doing stuff with all the major magazines. And I mean, you've always had, I think, from what I've seen, an innate ability to market the name and the brand. Is that something that you sort of figured out over time? How did that evolve?
Well, what's interesting is I always loved car magazines. And at one point, I wanted to be a car editor. I was a huge fan of Rich Zeppos, Chubba Chera. If you know all those guys back in the car driver days, I forget all the names now. And I used to read the magazine from cover to cover every month. I thought it was really cool. And I wanted to do a road test. And they did a lot of aftermarket, particularly car and driver, did and still does. But when I called, they wouldn't answer the phone because nobody knew who I was. So my father had just retired from his job at McDonnell Douglas, and I took my race trailer at the end of the race season for the SCCA club car. Let's see, it must have been a 85 535 turbo, or maybe it was an E24 M6 turbo. I can't remember. I think it was an M6. And I put it in the back of the trailer. I drove it to car and driver, and I came up, just knocked on the door. The interesting thing, their address was 2002 Hogback Road. And they picked 2002 as the address because it was a complex with a bunch of offices because they liked 2002. So the address happened to be a BMW address, which was interesting when I got there. And I went up, knocked on the door, and I can't remember who answered. And I said, look, I'm Steve Dinan, and here's this car, and you drive around the block. And if you don't like it, I'll tow it home. And if you do like it, I'll leave it. It was kind of a bold move. So my father drove the trailer that I flew in, just literally knocked on their door, and they drove the car on the block. They go, wow, this thing's incredible. One of the best aftermarket cars we've ever seen. Yeah, leave it. And I flew home. And that was the start of my media. And I wanted to do the same thing with Road and Track and Motor Trend and Auto Week back in those days, which was very big. And all the road tests were raves because one of my things has always been I have exceptional car feel. There are other guys that can go faster than me on the racetrack. I'm a pretty good race car driver, but there's other guys that are faster than me. But I have really good car feel, and I can feel when something is right and when something's not right. And I have this innate ability to connect the mechanical engineering to what I feel and understand how to solve the problem. It's something I was born with. And over time, obviously with a lot of feedback loops of fixing things and making things better and then driving them, I've refined the skill now to where I get in the car and I can drive around the block. Even our new race cars, I can get in the car, which I drive once in a while. And I notice things that even the professional race car drivers don't notice about the car, and I can make the car faster, even though I can't drive as fast as them.
Well, and you also, from everything I know about your whole arc and all the cars you've built over the years, you also have always taken a really balanced approach to building cars. It's not just like overpowered or a lot of suspension and light end. It's always kind of a real balance of suspension, brakes, motor, NVH, wheel and tire. Like, your cars have always had kind of a really nice setup so that you can actually use it, which is, I think, not super common with tuned cars, to be honest.
The easy thing to do is just make it as fast as you possibly can, and then it just is miserable to drive and brakes all the time. And when you're a young man and you have a lot of testosterone, that's a natural place that you gravitate to. But I like to drive my cars every day, and I like them to be reliable. And like you said, I like them to not to be overpowered, so the handling matches, if not exceeds, the power the car has, so the car will cover lots of ground. Because as we started the conversation, I like to drive fast, and I like to drive fast on 2-lane country roads as well as racetracks. And a car that just kills the brakes and destroys the engine drivetrain, you get 20 miles down the road and the car's overheating, the brakes are done. So I want a car that's going to go from point A to point B faster than any other car. In order to do that, it has to stop, it has to turn, it has to be reliable, it can't overheat. And so my objective was always that if I'm going to go from like from my office in San Jose to your office, I did in 3 hours and 52 minutes last week when I dropped the car off. That's not an under 4-hour drive, is it?
No, that's a 6-hour drive. So that's
right. And I did it on 2-lane roads too.
And for any law enforcement listening, that's allegedly you did that, right? So
allegedly I did that, yes. And the car, when I got there, was as fresh as the moment I picked it up. It's not complaining. It's not doing anything weird. Doesn't need any service work. That's also one of the reasons I got so much press with Car and Drive and Road and Track, because they were so used to getting tuner cars that would break during the road test, or the guy would come with a van and follow the car around and change parts while they were tuning the car. Left in the car the first time, they said, well, how long can you leave it? I said, I don't know, as long as you want. Since I left it there like 3 weeks. And they went to Chrysler Proving Ground and drove it around and beat on the car hard. And they said, look, this is as close to an OEM car we've ever seen out of an aftermarket tuner. And they were immediately fans. And I still operate the same way today.
Well, and that's, I think, having known you and worked with you a long time and had a lot of your vehicles come through our kind of studio and press fleet program, it is very rare to get a very high performance tuned vehicle that is reliable as pretty much all of your stuff has been. So you're right. And it's surprising how kind of bulletproof they are and usable, which is the other thing. A lot of these cars aren't usable. Like, they can be really bitching and run, 10s in the quarter, but then they puke coolant when you shut them off, that kind of thing. And your cars don't do that. They're totally sorted. I have to imagine, Steve, so like when you started the business, the 320 was not a particularly high performance vehicle. It was ahead of its time, but it wasn't like fast, and you sort of made it fast. But over time, what was your relationship like with BMW? I mean, when did they kind of figure out you existed? And as M cars started to show up, how did that impact? Like, I've never actually asked you that question before. How did that relationship work and develop over time? And did it make things better or harder?
Well, in the beginning, the factories always think that the aftermarket's evil because they've made a perfect car and we're destroying it. And so when I would try and get dealers to sell my product, typically BMW would shut it down. So I started selling parts over the country, via mail order in the back of the magazines, as well as people shipping cars to me. I probably had 100 cars shipped to me a year because people just wanted me to do the work from all over the country. And then I had independent shops that would install the product as well. The relationship with BMW just kept naturally growing because I got so much good press. I think I wound up with like 80 magazine road tests and like 13 covers must have been the early 90s. And so finally, BMW knocked on my door. They literally showed up at my facility in Mountain View, California, knocked on the door. A guy named Rich Breckus, I still know him. He lives down in Florida. He's retired from BMW now. I said, hey, the new president of BMW, which was Vic Doolan, out of South Africa, said that we should have a relationship with a tuner in the United States. And so I'm going around the country and visiting all the tuners, us, Turner, Miller, Norburn, whoever was around, Alpina West back in those days. So I gave him a tour facility. He gave me a ride, one of my favorite rides. And he said, well, the other people are selling parts. You are the really only engineering firm in this country. He made a technical decision. He was an ex-Ford engineer. That my technical capabilities and the capabilities of my staff and my facility was in a different league from the rest of the people that were in the automotive tuning business, in the BMW tuning business. So he invited me back for a series of meetings at BMW. This was 1996. I think it was. And I met the president of BMW, had lunch in his private dining room and, all that kind of stuff, met with the warranty department, the engineering department. And it took about half a year to a year. And they finally decided to quasi-bless me. But they wanted to put a toe in the water. So in case I did something wrong, they could disavow any knowledge of my action, like Mission Impossible. So they said, look, we're going to let you approach our dealers. And we're going to let you sell out of the dealership network. And we're not going to encourage them, but we're not going to discourage them. And as long as you're willing to match the warranty on everything you touch, including consequential damages. So if I put a tune and the engine goes bad, I own the engine or the gearbox. We will not void the warranty on the rest of the car. We won't stand in your way. But they had 350 dealers in the United States and Canada, and you have to approach each one of them individually, and you have to sell the GM on it. And they said, we'd like you not to do more than 10 the first year in case something goes wrong. I said, okay. So at that point, I had just finished the E36 supercharged M3, and I took it to Car and Driver and to Road and Track and said, hey, I'm blessed by the factory. Can you do an article? And I got the cover of Road and Track. I don't remember if I got the cover of Car and Driver. Dinan is approved by BMW. I wound up signing up 35 dealerships in the first year because of the media. And the business between 1996 and 2001 doubled again because of that. It was quite a ride. Like, we could barely make enough parts.
Did you actually abide by the 10 car first year thing, or did you blow past it and just do as many as you could do?
No, we did 35.
Okay. 35 builds.
We did 35 dealers, not 35 builds.
So a lot of cars.
We sold 1,050 M3s, E36 M3s with lower kits and suspensions on them.
So 100x what they told you to do.
They didn't mean 10 cars. They meant 10 dealers. They only wanted to manage 10 dealers. So I did 35 dealers. They didn't specify the number of cars. Okay, but I called them up and when we got to about 15, I go, look, people really want to sign up. And this is like 3 or 4 months in. And Rich goes, well, we're getting no complaints. Let me check with the warranty department. So they check with the warranty departments. No, we're not getting any complaints. I'll let them keep going. So I didn't do it without talking to them.
If you think about that, like if you try to put yourself in their shoes for a minute, it's interesting because the mid 90s was when the M program was really starting to get interesting. I mean, they were suddenly coming out with some pretty neat stuff. Do you think they saw they would have like a good, better, best, and then Dinan could be this like other thing on top of best? Is that what the idea was? Because I still can't understand exactly why they would want that.
Well, originally they were worried that I would take sales away from M. And I said, you don't understand. The M car people are our sales. I've explained this 100 times. When you own an M car or an AMG Mercedes, whatever the performance model is, you've qualified yourself to be a high performance customer in 2 ways. One is it's the most expensive car they make, so you have money. And the second thing is you bought the fastest car, and the only way you can go faster is if you go aftermarket. So we weren't stealing sales away from M cars. We were promoting M car sales. And M car sales actually went up. And I don't want to take credit for M car sales increasing, but I think our brand and our road tests had a positive impact on the sales growth result of M in the United States.
Well, it's certainly added to their media coverage and legitimacy. And especially, Car and Driver and Track at the time, they test an M3. They're probably not going to test another M3 3 months later. But if it's a Dinan M3, that's another kind of bite of the apple, right?
No, I doubled their press every single year. And I got a lot of great press because the cars were reliable and fast. And the dealers just kept signing. And by the time I was done, I wound up with 185 stores out of 360 stores selling Dinan products.
That's amazing. So at that point, things are really cranking. When do you start endurance racing? When did that come online?
A friend of mine by the name of Price Cobb, people probably recognize the name. He won Le Mans and Daytona. He was a prototype racing GTP on the old 962 days. He's the same age as me. When Grand Am started in 2003, he was racing I think it was called a Picchio was the chassis. It was a terrible chassis, and it had a BMW V8 in it made by PTG, Tom Milner's outfit. And he calls me and says, Steve, I would really like you to do an engine because when I was a driver in the 90s in GT2, Price was in a 993 Porsche and I was in a BMW 540 Turbo I made. And he goes, even when I beat you, which was most of the time because he was better than me and he had a factory program and I was building the car, engineering the car and driving it myself, but I was still always in the top 5. He goes, you always had more straight line speed than me. So since this is a BMW engine, I'd like you to build me an engine. And I said, well, Price, I retired from driving in 1996. That was, 7 years earlier. He said, I don't want to get back in again. It's too painful for me. He goes, no, come on, buddy, help me out. So he taught me into building an engine. And in 2004, we put it in the car and it was immediately the best engine in the series, but we didn't have any good teams. We had some okay teams. We won a race here and there. We won Mexico City. We won Miami one year. And then Chip Ganassi had lost their contract with Lexus. And Lexus was sponsoring V8s for Chip Ganassi. And he had 2 cars at Daytona, one for the rest of the year with Scott Pruitt and Memo Rojas. And so Mike Hull, who runs Chip's organization, called us up and said, hey, we've noticed that you have the best engines, but you don't have the best team. Would you like to have a relationship? And I said, sure. And he goes, but we don't pay for things. We're Chip Ganassi, so you have to give them to us. And an engine program in those days was $400,000 a year. And this was coming out of a pretty big recession. And it was a difficult financial time for us. We weren't really making any money, but I came to the conclusion that when is Chip Ganassi ever going to knock on your door ever again? So the wife and I remortgaged our house and we gave Chip free engines.
I did not know that.
I've got a great wife. Yes.
So you call Jan, who also is in finance in your company. So it's not like she's just sitting at home not paying. She knows where the business is at. And you say, hey, I want to mortgage the house to send free motors to one of the biggest race teams in the world. And I guess was the idea that it would be like a win on Sunday, sell on Monday deal? Was that the thought, that it would drive Dinan parts and vehicle sales?
That was the hope, but also I'm just a racing addict. It's my heroin.
I guess.
And the chance to, and the chance to win prototype racing and win the 24 Hours of Daytona overall was so compelling to me that I figured it was probably the coolest thing I'd ever do in my life, even if I went bankrupt. So I went all in.
And did you approach them to say, hey, you got to kick in on this deal because it could be good for you guys too? Or
I did. I contacted M brand manager was Eric Wensberg, and he had a guy working for him named Larry Koch. And they said, Steve, you're an independent company. When we race prototype, BMW does it on a factory level like they're doing now with Rahal Letterman. And we're not interested in supporting your program, but, hope you do well. So Chip's team was so amazing and my motor was so good. And we had this instantaneous gel like you have very rarely in racing, where the drivers, the engineers, the crew, my guys at Dinan who built the engines, the track support people that work for me, all wanted to win so bad. We're all on the same page. And the quality of the work was so high that we won 9 out of 12 races in the first year. Still to this day, the most number of race wins in a year in prototype racing in either IMSA or Grand Am, most number of race wins in a year, most number of laps led in a year in the history of prototype racing in North America. So it was just one of those stars lined up thing. It was a struggle for us financially. It was one of the best decisions I ever made. And we wound up not only winning 9 out of 12 races, we came back the following year, won the 24 Hours of Daytona overall. I believe we went 1-2, won the championship in the second year. And then we came back in 2013, won 24 Hours of Daytona again, and won the championship again in the third year, 3 back-to-back.
I saw those all on TV and it was exciting at home. I can't imagine what it must have been like to be in the pit, knowing that was your motor and being there for a three-peat like that.
No, it was incredible. And when we were leading the race at Daytona the first time we were going to win it, there was an hour to go. And when race engines get rubber on the front radiator meter, the coolant pressure goes up as the engine starts to get warm. And we have a coolant pressure sensor. This car has telemetry on it. And the coolant pressure is going higher and higher. And I'm thinking, oh my God, head gasket's going to go bad or something, right? A good friend of mine, Al, who owned the shop that he hired me when I made $5.50 as a BMW mechanic in 1977. He's still a friend of mine. He came to the race. He's standing next to me. He goes, Steve, close the laptop. Don't look. Either it makes it the last hour or it doesn't. And it did. It ran fine. And it proved to be an incredibly durable engine. The interesting thing is, as soon as we won the championship, BMW showed up at the banquet and tried to collect the trophy for the manufacturers.
You're kidding.
No, in 2012, 2011, we came back and won the 24 Hours Daytona. They were at Daytona at this point. They decided to give me some parts and a little bit of money. And they gave a little bit of money to Chip in year 2. And they showed up at Daytona and tried to collect the manufacturer's trophy. And I stepped in front of them and took it.
Well, you gave them a chance and they declined. So that's what it is.
Yeah. Chip in his incredible style says, well, Steve, look, we can't survive on, just free engines. We need to get some real money out of this. So he has citation 10, and me and Mike Hull and him, we flew to Munich and met with Dr. Tyson, who was running the Formula One program at the time. He agreed to have a meeting with Chip because Chip's Chip. I could never get a meeting with him. And Chip walks in and said, well, look, are we going to do this or are we not going to do this? If we're going to do it, or are we going to do it right? And so literally in 30-minute conversation, Dr. Tyson agreed to give us a bunch of money, Chip a bunch of money, and me a bunch of engine parts for free. And then the engine program actually started making money like the rest of the business. And we were off and running. And we did, 3 back-to-back. And at the same time, we also won a GS championship, which is now GT4. We run a ST championship, which is now TCR. And we won a GT championship in Germany, building engines. So we wound up winning, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 championships in 4 or 5 years globally.
I remember the first time I walked into your showroom and you had the Daytona trophy just sort of sitting there. It's pretty incredible. So you mortgage your house to provide free engines to an endurance racing team. You win 3 years in a row. You win everything. It sounds like. Then you get factory backing after that. At some point during that arc, do you feel like it's making a difference in terms of the streetcar business? Is the phone ringing? Are people saying, hey, I saw you on TV. I think back then it was probably Speed Vision or whatever. Did it drive the other side of the business at that point?
It certainly dramatically improved my relationship with BMW because I've winning championships for them. They got a copy of all the trophies and they're in the showroom at Woodcliff Lake when you walk in BMW North America headquarters. My trophies from the Grand Am era. Every single one of them. I don't know if they're still there, but they were there. And I wound up the relationship with BMW Motorsports over it because I go to Germany and we'd talk about engine development parts together with their, back in those days, Formula One staff. So it was kind of a heady time for us. It really was amazing. So my relationship with BMW overall dramatically improved from top to bottom. I'd still have having no warranty issues with the BMW dealers, and I was winning races for them. So at this point, I could say things couldn't really get any better.
And, it's interesting because I think younger people who listen to the show won't totally understand that, because now there's so much stuff going on with these small volume manufacturers, and there's a million little Singer versions running around, and companies that are doing these little low volume kind of continuation cars and all that stuff. I mean, that's all kind of normalized today. But even in the 90s and early 2000s, to have a globally known brand with national parts distribution and a name that's up there pretty much almost like a household name, even for not car people, to know what a Dinan BMW is, was kind of unique. I don't think, maybe Callaway, I guess, would be the only other one that might, similar.
Yeah, I don't think Callaway ever reached the level that we did.
No.
Obviously Shelby.
Yeah, right.
Alpina,
Okay.
AMG. Reeves passed away not too long ago, too, by the way.
Yeah, he did. I know. That's too bad. He was a nice man.
He made the first turbo kit I put in my 77 320i. It needed a lot of work, so I took his turbo kit and I changed a lot of things in it to make it better before I started making my own. But it was really bold of him to make it, and he flew out to the Al's shop in Campbell, California, and personally hand delivered the turbo kit and went over it with me. So
that's cool.
So I've known him for a long time. Great guy.
Yeah,
real car enthusiast.
He was a smart guy, really interesting guy. So during all of this stuff, so you're building your business, it's growing, you're growing your dealer distribution channel, the actual car build side of the business, as well as the racing program. How much as you grow the business and you scale it, and you're going through this arc, and especially I assume at some point, once BMW got more officially involved in the race program, that kind of division kind of becomes sort of its own business unit at some point, and it's not funded by the Dinan family home. What are you thinking about during all this? Is there like, hey, we're just going to keep growing and scaling and I'm having a good time. Let's just keep going. Or was there ever like some sort of end game that you were working towards?
Honestly, I love what I'm doing so much. I'd probably do it the day before they put me in the ground. I wasn't really planning on selling the business. But again, somebody knocked on my door during a very bad economic time and offered to buy the business. But they offered me a lot less than it was worth. And I said, you know what? I'm going to fix the business. It's going to be successful again. And if you're serious about buying it, tell me what your price would be now, and we'll scale it accordingly when the business is doing better. And we'll talk. And 3 years later, the business was back on its feet, being very successful. And they came back and offered me so much money. I thought I would never see that much money ever again because they wanted the brand. And the brand was, like you said, big. And I wasn't really ready to retire, but I thought I would never get more for the business, and that's part of the reason you start a business, obviously, at some point, hopefully to sell it for more than you have into it. And I did that. And I went to work for Chip Ganassi when they launched the Ford GT program. I moved to Indianapolis, and that was 2013. I sold the business. I moved to Chip's place in 2015 and moved to Indianapolis.
I guess I have a lot of questions about that. So we were working together when you sold it. I actually had a couple of clients that sold to that same group and around the same time. And what was that like? Because at the time in our industry, that was kind of a new thing. I think private equity was in a lot of other industries, but in the performance and aftermarket, it just wasn't a huge issue. And then all of a sudden, it's private equity comes in and starts buying businesses. And I think at the time there were a lot of founders that were in the same position as you, where it was a big check. They were maybe close to retirement age, but not quite there. And they're like, well, hey, this is a good opportunity. Let me just do it. And I'm curious what your experience was, because I've heard a lot of the same story. And I have a funny feeling yours will be pretty similar. But what was that like when you signed the paperwork and all of a sudden this thing that has been like your other kid for all these years is not your thing anymore?
And like your child as an apt description, I was 59 at the time. Like I said, I was close to retirement, but not really ready to retire. But Chip liked me so much, we got along so well that he said, well, just come to work for me. It'd be like a fun thing to do in your retirement. And I said, well, that sounds cool, just to do nothing but racing. So I was ready for a change. I'd had the business 34 years. I mean, that's a long time, and there've been a lot of ups and downs, and it's a long run. And regardless of how cool it seems on the outside, there's always, like I had 72 employees. There's always employee problems. There's always money issues. Things get better, things get worse. A lot of stress involved. I said, it'd be nice to live on somebody else's money for a while and not worry about it and make some investments and just live off the investments, So, but the problem was I guess I was under some delusion that they understood what Dinan was when they bought it. Because for me, it was I'm going to make the best quality product. I'm going to give the best customer support, and I'm going to make money because I've done that. My goal was never to make money. Money was a side effect of just doing a good job. They came into it with a bunch of accountants and stripped all things that were not making money, including racing was the very first thing they got rid of. Because, even though I was, doing well in racing, racing's not a highly profitable business. I've made money in racing, I really have, and most people haven't. By that standard, I've done well in racing, but it's not where most of my money came from, that's for sure. And so they wanted to boil it down to whatever was the most profitable parts I made. Bolt-on parts like intakes, exhaust, software, and turn into a parts company. And I was disappointed because I wanted to maintain the prestige of the brand. And we made a lot of things when I owned Dinan that don't make money. Like we built stroked and bored engines for V10 M5s. And look, we don't make money on those. We make those because they make cool road tests when I bring the cars to you. And when I sell a few hundred of those a year, I sell a few thousand bolt-on parts because most people don't want to spend, $50,000 modifying a car. But that's kind of the halo you create around the brand, kind of like what M-Car does for the rest of the BMW brand. Like people who buy, X1s and X3s buy them because for some reason they think BMW is a really neat brand. And it's a really neat brand because of all the things that BMW does, but it's not because of X1s and X3s. I always visioned that the racing and the ultra high performance cars was the halo around the brand that generated the revenue for the rest of the company. And it was the part I really enjoyed, but I understood I had to make thousands of parts for people to bolt on because I couldn't make enough money on just a halo brand to survive. I think that's a mistake a lot of young tuners make. I see these cars all the time, 1,000, 1,300 horsepower M3s, and they go out to the runways and they have the highest top speed and the fastest quarter mile. But how many of those do you sell a year? How do you pay the bills? How do you stay in business doing that? It's cool. I think it's cool too, but you also have to be somewhat of a businessman. And along the way, I also turned out to be a pretty good businessman, just naturally.
Two-part question, I guess. First of all, you were unquestionably the king of that castle, right? I mean, I saw it with my own eyes, as you should have been. So I guess my first part of the question is was it hard all of a sudden when you get to Ganassi and now you're working for someone else? Was that a relief or was that weird? And then the second part of the question is, meanwhile, you're living in Indy, watching this thing you spent 34 years building kind of turning into something else. And what was that like?
It was painful. It really was painful. I love Chip and I love his guys. I love the organization. I was my own boss for 34 years. So yes, working for someone else was hard. And I would sometimes have good ideas that I would take to Mike Hall and Chip Ganassi and say, I want to do this. And they go, okay, Steve, thanks for the input. I'll go back and do your job. Look, it's their company. I respect that. But I was expecting, because of who I was, that maybe I would get more latitude to do more things than your average employee would. It did not seem like that was actually the case. Like I thought I could lead some new departments and some fundamental changes to Ganassi to make it better. And they viewed me as an employee. Chip liked me a lot and gave me a job because I sold my business. I'm not sure if they even knew why they hired me or what they wanted me to do exactly. Yeah. So my job I thought was going to be to run the prototype race team, which had switched to Fords at that point when the BMW program had ended. The Ford GT program was coming. Turns out they'd hired somebody else to do that, and they wanted me to be the corporate liaison to Ford. So my job was to call up Ford every week and say hi on the phone and go to the racetrack and shake their hand and eat lunch with them and send them emails and things like that. And while I'm good at that, I did a lot of that with BMW. I think that's why Chip hired me, because I had such a good relationship with BMW, and I brought BMW on board for him. He thought I could do the same thing with Ford. But I'm a car tuner, car engineer, car racer first, and a public relations person second. It just wasn't my love. It's just not what I wanted to do. And in the meantime, like say in the backdrop, the people about my company decided that this is an hysterical thing. Dinan Engineering has too many engineers and they get paid too much. And the way to increase the profitability of the company would be get rid of most of the engineering department.
This is not a good plan.
That certainly works for a while because you cut your overhead way down, but eventually you run out of new things to sell. And the engineers are the people that design the new things that you sell.
One of the things that I remember very clearly about our first 6 months of working together and our first handful of conversations, and it really left an impression on me, is as a guy who grew up my entire life as a car guy. I mean, I learned to read reading car magazines, just like you're talking about. So to me, I have all these things that I fixate on that I think are really cool, like E31s. I've always thought E31s. And I understand now as a middle-aged man that this is not a good, responsible financial decision to go buy a bunch of E31s. But I still think those are beautiful cars. I think they're gorgeous. I think, and the cars you were building back at the time were unbelievably cool. So I have all this like nostalgia for the stuff that was cool when I was a kid, right? And I think like, E30 M3s are like the coolest and all that. I would talk to you about like that stuff and you could not have been like, you were just like, oh yeah, we built those. But like, look at the new, it was always the new thing. Whatever the new thing is, that's the thing you were excited about. And it took me a while to understand. I'm like, it's because you're such an engineer and you're so performance focused. You're excited about the new thing, whatever the new thing is. Is that fair? Is that a fair assessment?
No, look, I mean, really, people always ask me what my favorite car is, and usually it's when I'm doing some car club event, and they hope I'm going to say a 2002 or something, But for me, technology marches on, and each new car is faster than the one before. Like the M4 I just sent you is just a phenomenal car, the fastest car I've ever built on a 2-lane country road, refined, durable, everything you want a car to be, and it's far and away better than just the last one, just 5 years old. So every time I see a new BMW, and the BMW engineers are a phenomenal group of people, I look at all the things they've improved and I look at all the problems with the last one that I already know because I've been developing the car for 7 years. And I immediately like the new car better because I see all the things that were corrected and made better.
That's what I'm talking about.
Even though I'm a car guy, I have no nostalgia for cars.
Right. It's a lack of nostalgia. This is what I think that's so cool. And where I think that ties into this conversation is it's just really weird timing because I heard a podcast this morning that was not automotive related where they were talking about an innovation deficit. And they were saying that like any good product company needs to invest a certain amount of their budget every year in innovation and in developing new product and constant improvement and process improvement and new products. And there's an element of PR even that like having something new to talk about is a PR tactic. Like you're always talking about whatever the latest, greatest thing is, even if it's a revision of a prior product. If you stop innovating, and you stop devoting budget to that, you're right. It's a short-term gain, right? Like your margins increase because engineers are expensive and product development is expensive and all that stuff's expensive. But like there ends up being this challenge in this deficit because if you stop doing it at some point, first of all, you have nothing new to talk about, but also your competitors are probably continuing to innovate, right? So that's going to catch up with you at some point.
When I sold the company, we had 52 employees and we had 14 people working in the engineering department between fabricators, engine development people, CAD people, software people. 14 out of 52 people. It's almost 30% of the staff is doing development. But that's why the product was so good. That's why we always had the best product and led the marketplace, because we were outspending everybody 3-1. I never worried about being richer. The company was successful. I made a lot of money. I would take, half of the money I could have made every year and put it in my pocket and put it back in the business again.
I mean, I remember the last couple of years before you sold it, you had software guys there that were like wizards that you were like bringing in from all over the world, just writing code and like cracking software. And it was really, it was pretty high level stuff at a time when I don't think there was a lot of tuning companies doing that. That was a pretty unusual thing for the time.
Now, we had 5 people in the software department. The 2 top guys were making $250,000 each, which was real money.
Yeah. Yeah, that's still real money. But back then, that was really real money.
Yeah, that was a lot of money. That was 15 years ago.
Yeah. So fast forward, you leave Ganassi. You decide you don't want to be a PR guy, which, hey, I won't take that personally. It's okay.
It's all right. I mean, it's not a, not denigrating anybody. It just wasn't my thing,
No, I get it. I get it. So at what point do you and I don't know, like, is there like a non-compete you have to wait out, or how does that all work when all of a sudden you say, hey, like, let's go? Like you grab Jan and say, I got more fight left in me. Let's do it.
Well, I had a 5-year non-compete, and the wife looked at me every day when I came home from work. I worked for Chip for 11 months and 1 day. And every time I'd come home, she'd go, you look miserable. I've never seen you look so miserable. I said, well, I just want to do something great, and they won't let me. And she said, well, at this point, the people who had bought Dinan, I had 2 service centers and the engine racing shop, and they didn't want them. And they just wanted the parts company. And I said, I don't want to keep part of it. I'm moving to Indiana. So I made him take the whole thing. And I stayed in contact with him for the whole year I worked with Chip. And finally, the guy said, look, we will sell you back a third of the company for 10 cents on the dollar what you sold to us for, if you just take it off our hands. And I said, all right. So I bought the engine shop back in 2 service centers, and I was just going to build racing engines and manage the service centers and work a half a day and just call that my retirement. I had been doing a lot of flying. I bought an airplane when I used to go to all the BMW deals, 180 deals. I had a turboprop. I used to fly myself, and so I was enjoying flying. So I said, that'll be fine. But then I was also, my service centers were selling Dinan parts, and the Dinan parts just weren't like the Dinan parts when I owned Dinan. And I was starting to get embarrassed to put parts on cars that had my name on them. Oof. And so I wound up taking one part they made and making a replacement because I didn't like it. And then I made a second part, and then I made a third part. And sooner or later, I was making a product line again. And I wasn't intending to go back into business again. I just wanted to put quality pieces on people's cars. And there was nothing wrong with the parts. They were okay. They were honestly a better than average aftermarket part. But there was always something really special about our parts. We always went the extra mile, and that energy just wasn't there. I had a 5-year non-compete. At the end of 5 years, I decided to, hire some engineers and some people and just go whole hog into making parts again. But this time I decided that I was not going to do just BMW. I was going to do BMW, Audi, Porsche, and Mercedes, because I wanted to do something different than the last time. I decided instead of doing all the cars, which I used to do with BMW, all the models, I would just specialize in the M cars, AMGs, S and RSs, just take the very high-end cars and only tune those. That's where my love is anyway.
And that's CarBahn.
That's CarBahn. My wife thinks I'm crazy. I should do a startup. But at this point, she's been with me for 47 years, and she understands what I'm about, and she understands she can't stop me anyway. And she just kind of goes along for the ride, and I've never failed her. So she kind of gives me a lot of latitude.
I think your brain and your right foot kind of perform in similar ways. So I get it.
That's true.
You're a full throttle guy. So you start up at the same time, you get pretty deep back into racing, right? Like you really went after it almost from day one.
Well, I didn't at first. I had the business I started the business in 16, I think, or 17. And my non-compete was up in 18. And at that time, a friend of mine, which I used to set up a car for him in Grand Am when I was being a chassis engineer, called me and said, hey, I got a couple of guys in Ferrari Challenge. They're both venture capitalists. They have some money. They're interested in starting a race team. Would you like to run a race team? And I said, sure. And so I convinced the wife into selling one of our homes. We had a rental home. Here I am selling my real estate again, and went out and bought a whole bunch of equipment and hired a crew and started a race team. And then these guys sponsored it. And in our second year in 2019, we won the GT4, which IMSA calls the GS championship, running an Audi R8. And I decided, since I don't have to do BMWs only anymore, I would race something different for a change. So I raced an Audi R8.
Once again, we're back to endurance racing, back to road racing. Now you're cross brand. And how did the community react when you showed back up and you've got a new brand, you got a new logo on your shirt, you're running Audis instead of BMWs, which is honestly probably shocking for some people. How did that go?
I think Audi liked it a lot.
I bet.
What
did the BMW
they were
guys
very
think?
excited to have me. I don't know. They would. What's interesting is all the BMW guys I knew back when I owned Dinan had since moved on, and new people were in charge, and they didn't really seem to know the legacy of me. They didn't seem to know that I'd won the prototype championship Daytona for them. I mean, some of the people did, but the majority of the people didn't even understand that they had lost an opportunity, because I called them first and I said, look, I'm going back into racing. Would you help me out financially with a new program? And they said, no, but if you want to buy a car and parts, we'll sell you one. And then I called Audi and they go, Steve Dinan wants to switch to Audi. Yeah, we'll give you, what do you need? So Audi gave me a bunch of free parts and helped me out a bunch. And so I said, all right, well, racing takes money. So I guess that kind of makes the decision. And I switched to Audi. We're not being my 12th championship in car racing.
That's awesome.
2019 that was.
How about the fans? What did the BMW, I mean, I know for a fact that there are BMW fanboys that think you walk on water. So what did they do when you're when you're competing in an Audi?
They would come by the paddock and say hi to me and say, we like you anyway, but we're disappointed you're racing an Audi. I would get a lot of comments like that, but they didn't really seem to kick me to the curb. They were just bewildered, I think, a little bit. And the TV announcers too. Well, here he is, Steve Dinan's car winning a race in an Audi. It doesn't make any sense to us, but that's what he's doing. So that was on TV all the time.
I like it. So bring us to today. What are you guys working on? Tell us about the car that's in our press fleet, but also kind of what do you have just in general? What's in the hopper?
Well, we're racing a BMW again. We're racing a new G Series M4 in IMSA and GS again. We went all the way up to WeatherTech and GTD, which is GT3 car, racing a Lamborghini Huracan in 2022, believe it or not. Did very well with that car, but our sponsor went to IndyCar racing. This is with Aero McLaren now, so we lost the WeatherTech sponsorship, so we had to go back down to GT4. But we won the Indy race 2 races ago. We finished third in the last race at Petit Le Mans, Atlanta. So we're hoping to come back in next season and win the championship in GT4 again in a BMW this time. And I still have the same driver, by the way, Jeff, who raced for me back in 2010 in Grand Am and won the championship in the Audi in 19. We've sort of developed quite a close relationship because he understands that I'm relentless in making the car better. And he's a driver like I am an engineer, where he's like a machine. Like he's like, I referenced Mario Andretti, where every lap is the same. You look at his data traces, he looks like somebody painted him on a computer screen, an example of a data trace. He's a thinking driver behind the wheel. You can have a conversation with him about strategy during the race, where most people are just at their limit of cognitive function, and he can drive a car on the limit and still have a conversation with you like you're going down to the grocery store. So I like working with him, and we have sort of a shorthand. Like he tells me what the car is doing, and I, in my mind, since I used to race, can picture what he's saying, and I know what to do, and I change it. And then he comes back and evaluates what I do. And so we have this incredible connection to make the car better. It's really fun to work with him.
And what's happening on your streetcar program? What's that going on?
We decided to do all BMW parts first because everybody knows us for that, and it would be easier to sell. And plus, BMW sells more M cars than AMGs and RS Porsches, combined. So we went back in the BMW business first. We're almost done with the complete BMW line. We'll be done next year, and we've already started an Audi. So you'll see a bunch of Audi cars come from us next year. But this car we have right now is a new G Series M4 X-Drive. I really love all-wheel drive cars when you have a lot of power, because two-wheel drive cars always have a traction problem, and this thing doesn't. And it's incredible. We took it to the skid pad. It pulls just under 1.2 Gs.
Wow.
Without wings. I mean, that's phenomenal how well the car handles. And it has so much traction, goes all-wheel drive. You can just roll into a corner, and as soon as you have the apex may just go to watt, and the car drives off the corner and doesn't give you a wiggle or do anything. It just leaves the corner at a speed you just can't believe, the exit speed off the corner. Plus, they come with carbon ceramic brakes now, so it stops. And it's so easy to make power with modern cars. It makes 735 horsepower on pump gas with all the emissions equipment on the car, passing California emissions test.
That's unbelievable. So there's more boost, more air in, more air out.
Yeah, it's a basic exhaust, intake, heat exchanger, and software, 735 horsepower. And I wanted to have this done in time, but I didn't for this media test. We're making a 3.2 liter stroker motor with larger turbos, and it's going to make just right around 800 horsepower. Still smog legal, still durable, drive every day, go 100,000 miles. And we still offer a 4-year, 50,000 mile warranty. You can still buy the product at the BMW dealer. And we offer now a 10-year, 100,000 mile warranty you can buy on a CarBahn modified car.
How do you do that? How do you get a warranty on something that high performance that's got kind of a hand-built motor? Is it like a private party insurance company basically, or? The
first 450 is covered by us, believe it or not, for $1,500, because we're that confident the car is not going to break. The insurance company is an independent insurance company. It goes 10 and 100. I think because of reputation, durability of our product, they thought it was worthwhile to take the risk. And I think they've done well financially. They charge a lot more than I do, but I don't want to insure the car for 10 years. It's too long to warrant a high performance car, but they're doing fine. We haven't had very many issues.
I mean, what's amazing to me is that car is probably faster than a funny car from the 60s. in reality, like, between power and tire technology and everything else. And it's got 30 airbags or something and a infotainment system and a whole lot of weight. And it's got a 10-year warranty available. It's incredible.
No, it does 0 to 60 in 2.6 seconds and a quarter mile at 10, 6, and 131 with all the emissions equipment in the car, and you could drive it as a grocery getter into work every day. And that's phenomenal. I mean, a 10-second quarter mile car that's emissions legal and drivable. And with the engine, it's probably going to be like 9.9 at 140. Again, with a factory matching warranty. Nines.
That's insane. Okay. Well, that's crazy. So with all that in mind, Steve, where I wanted to kind of wind up on the car stuff is we live in such a weird time that like you can go buy a car like that from a dealer. I mean, I think Ferrari just in the last 24 hours, the day we're recording this, announced their new sort of LaFerrari replacement. I mean, there's some unbelievable performance cars on the market right now. And yet at the same time, this electrification thing is like looming. Is it anything we need to worry about? Like, where do you see all that going?
I mean, I'll start a little bit about where BMW is headed. I'm a little disappointed in the new M5. We talked earlier about how I always like the newest car because the newest car is always a better car than the previous car. I think for the first time in my life, I have an M8, which I think you guys did test for me a couple of years ago, that gray one. Then I'm actually going to keep the car. I've never kept a BMW and not replaced with a new one because it weighs 4,150 pounds. The new one's 5,200 and some change. It's like 1,100 more pounds. And performance cars that weigh 1,100 more pounds are not fast.
Is it a hybrid, the new one?
Yeah, it's a hybrid. And I understand that the world needs to go electric and the world needs to go hybrid. And I'm okay with 75% of the cars we're on being a big golf carts driving around and cars that are hybrids that are good luxury cars. But when you make a performance car, the point of a performance car should be light and agile and should stop and it should turn. And even if you only make 5% of your fleet old-fashioned gasoline cars, it should be that 5%. So the fact that BMW felt compelled to make the performance brand like the generic car, a hybrid car, I find very disappointing. And I hate to say it, but I don't think it's the right call. To me, it's like when Mercedes-Benz took the C63, put the 4-cylinder hybrid in it, and it was not well received in the market. And I believe, you can tell me, you're closer to this part of the business than me, they're retreating and going back to V8s, aren't they?
Yep.
Yeah, because what guy who buys a C63 AMG Mercedes wants a 4-cylinder hybrid? Are you kidding me? I mean, that's okay in your generic SUV, but that's not the right engine for a person who likes performance cars. I don't believe a 5,300-pound hybrid is a performance sedan that people want to buy either. We had a meeting about figuring out how to strip the hybrid technology out of the car and turning it back into a previous generation technology car, but still maintaining the fact that it's a new car because people like to buy new cars. I'm really that upset about it. So I understand that in order to meet CAFE and emissions and all that kind of stuff, 95% of the cars have to be hybrid or electric. We're headed that way, and I'm okay with it. But it doesn't mean a small percentage of the fleet can't be an exception to that rule. Or you can't make a super ultra lightweight hybrid car, like some of the Ferrari supercars and stuff where it only gains a couple 100 pounds. But a performance car, to me, is a three-dimensional car. And it's the reason I don't like Tesla's Plaids and things. Yes, they're super fast 0 to 60. They're super fast in a quarter mile. But they don't stop, they don't turn because they weigh 5,000 pounds.
Physics is always going to be physics, right? Like that's hard to cheat.
Yes. And as we said before, I like driving on country roads. I like racing. I like my cars to stop and turn. There's no way a 5,300-pound car is going to do that as well as a 4,200-pound car, or even like the M4, a 3,700-pound car with everything we've done to it. And so I think there should be a small group of products that aren't that way, that don't have to meet those requirements that enthusiasts just want to buy and own. I'm hoping maybe BMW will make an M4 competition. The competition won't be hybrid, and that will restore my faith in the brand. But right now, I'm very concerned that even the next M4, M3 will be hybrid. And if they do, to me, that's the end of M.
It's a weird deal. But the only thing that gives me a little hope is appears to be a correction happening in real time, where everything from, I think Farley has actually, who's a real car guy, has been a little more open and transparent than most of the CEOs, where they announced they're not going to build cars anymore, and everyone's like, oh, okay. And now they're kind of backtracking on that. And Volkswagen, after Dieselgate, was like, all EV, we're going to be 100% EV. And I think they're now starting to reconsider that a little bit. So it seems like maybe market forces are hopefully going to temper this a little bit, because for a while there, it was starting to sound a little scary.
No, look, there's a place for electric cars in the world, and they do some things really great. They're super good commuter vehicles. They're quiet. They're smooth. They don't make any pollution. They're cheap to operate. Look, if you're going back and forth to work and you live in a city, it's absolutely the right car to have.
100%.
But it doesn't make a good racing car. It doesn't make a good country road car. And there's a place for those as well. I think there's a place for electric cars. There's a place for hybrid cars. And I think there's even a place for just plain old gasoline cars still in the future, even though those will become a smaller and smaller part of the fleet. I'm okay with that.
Yeah. But it doesn't have to be binary, like all or nothing.
Right. It doesn't have to be binary.
So what's next, Steve? With CarBahn, what's the plan? Is it kind of continue to try and service all those brands? Do you have like a vision of where you want this thing to go? Or is it just sort of kind of keep building badass cars and let the market do its thing?
I mean, it's a little bit of both. I mean, you can't control the market. People buy what they want, and you have to listen to what they want. I'm a little bit stubborn that I don't like to make the one-off cars that break and are unreliable and super fast. And there's a lot of that going on in the industry right now. But I like to have my car start every day when I get in it. I don't want to, have just a car what we used to call as a hangar queen, where it spends all its life in the garage because it very barely runs. To me, that doesn't make a car fun. Because to me, fun is driving a car. And if it's broken all the time, you can't drive it, then what's the point? As far as the business goes, we're branching off into Audi next year, the following year Porsche, the following year Mercedes. The M brand is larger in a high performance sales than all the other ones together. So we're probably going to wind up being half the business still BMW, the other half the other three brands. Not that we wouldn't like to do an equal amount of each, it's just the marketplace has gravitated toward BMW as the leader in this part of the industry. I was lucky in that regard. When I started Dinan, BMW didn't have M and they had 320i's. And so who would have thought they would have been the best high-performance brand in the world from a sedan standpoint? I accidentally picked them. That was just a dumb luck part of my life. So you get some of those sometimes too. And also dumb luck to be in the Silicon Valley where all the money was. There's always a little luck along the way. You're not successful 100% on your own skills, that's for sure. As far as racing goes, we want to come back and win the championship next year in 4-car and GS and IMSA, because we haven't won one since 2019, which is a long time for me. I usually win one every 2 or 3 years. So that's a long run for me. And we're hoping to get back up to WeatherTech in the big cars in the 24-hour. We're working on a program for that as well. So that's what's in store for me. I'm probably going to work until I can't anymore, because I find that I don't do retirement very well. And I like what I do so much, there's no reason to retire.
That's pretty cool. It's cool that you found your mission. And it's interesting that it took sort of selling your business to figure that out. So I respect the heck out of that. Steve, a question I ask everyone on this show is, my kind of motto, and the reason the show is called Only the Strong Survive is I think the way I personally learned most of the lessons I've learned in my life and in my career was by making mistakes and saying, okay, well, that was the wrong way to do that. And how do I not repeat that? And then I learn and I move on to the next mistake. The question I wanted to ask is, as you think back on your career, and it's a long, successful career, what's the biggest mistake you made and what did you learn from it?
Oh, I made a fair number of them. It's going to be hard to identify. You can't run a business long run a business and not have ups and downs and not learn some things. I guess probably the number one thing I was taught, the Great Recession taught me how lean you can run a business. When you're making a lot of money and one of your employees comes and says, I need another staff in my department, and you have money to spend, you just spend it. And you don't really sit down and, well, I didn't back in those days, do a budget to what the ramifications of the decision are. And then when the Great Recession came, I had 72 employees and my business went down by 40% in 90 days.
Whoa.
40%. And I was burning through $200,000 and $300,000 a month. I had a credit line at that time that I had a lot of money left on. And so I just kept charging money in the credit line, and I would come in every single day and think about how I could run the business leaner. And I'd read a book called The Goal. I don't know if you've ever read it.
No. I will.
It's a great book. I forget the author's name. It's taught in business schools all over the world now. It's one of the number one business books in the world. But it's about how to run a lean and successful, efficient manufacturing business without constraints inside. So I just read this book and I went through the entire company to analyze every bit of it. And I wound up coming down from 72 to 48 people, finally rebounded up to 52. And the business ran just as good as it did with the 72.
Wow.
And that was the number one lesson I learned. And so I wound up becoming a budget freak. As my wife says, I probably have thousands of Excel sheets on my computer now, where if I'm going to do anything, I'm going to make a budget and I'm going to calculate every cost and every person and every amount of time. I think it's fun budgeting. Most people probably don't think that's fun. But I get up every morning at 5 a.m. and I look at my budget for an hour while I'm having breakfast before I go to work. And then I do my emails and I get to the office at 7 before all the rest of my employees. And I've done all my emails, which is why you don't get emails from me in the afternoon. I do them for the day. That's the other thing, is I don't like the constant eruption of social media and emails in the modern world. I think makes you counterproductive. It slows you down and gets in the way. So I do all the electronic communication, emails, social media, everything I have to do before the day starts. And when the day starts, I just work all day like before that stuff existed. And I think I get a lot more done because of it. So I learned not to let that dominate your life. I learned to budget. And I learned that a business can run on less people than you think it can. I don't know if that's really a mistake necessarily, but that was the biggest thing I learned.
I went through an arc like that this year. So I think it's right. And say what you will about the plaid, that seems to be something that Elon is pretty good at too, is maximum efficiency, right? Cut everywhere you can. And usually just cut until it breaks and then add 2 more people back, and then you should be good to go.
Yeah, I wish they'd refresh the car. How long has that style been around?
Yeah, it's been a long time.
I mean, it's been a long time. I mean, he's too much of a, some people aren't an Elon Musk fan, but I am an Elon Musk fan because I also love space travel. So I like what he's doing with SpaceX and everything. So I can truly appreciate his greatness for what it is, but also he's got to be a difficult person to work for.
I cannot imagine. Yeah, I read the Isaacson book and I'm like, oh my God, this guy. I am a huge space nerd. And so I'm so excited about what's happening on that side of the business, but I couldn't imagine working there. Oh my God.
No, he's truly a disruptor in every marketplace and a game changer. And I respect him for all that, but he's not enough of a car guy.
No.
He should hire somebody like me to come in and fix the Teslas.
Yeah, no, you're right. I think that's starting to show a little bit too, as the rest of the industry kind of catches up.
No, and they will too. And I said this to people in the beginning. People said to me, is Tesla going to take over the world? I said, no, because even though he's the first one there, the car companies will have to electrify as well. And they have a more sophisticated process for building and developing cars. And ultimately, their cars will wind up being better and electric, not just electric.
Right.
And then his business will go the other way. That was my prediction. It's taken a little longer than I thought, but I think it's happening.
Yeah, it seems like that thing is evolving into an infrastructure business where they've got these charging stations that all the other OEMs are using. And hey, good for them. That's a cool idea that I had never thought of.
And battery technology and all kinds of things, like cars might go away and it might be just all the support for everybody else making electric cars might wind up, it becomes, solar panels and batteries and that sort of thing.
Yeah, it's interesting. Well, Steve, I know we went over time. You've been very generous with your time, so thank you. I appreciate these conversations so much. For people who want to follow your journey and learn more about CarBahn, where should they go and what's the best thing for them to do?
It's CarBahn.com. We dropped the AutoWorks. So it's just CarBahn.com, and CarBahn Official is our social, and you can go there and check us out. Plus, there's a bunch of great media come out the M4 right now, so I think there's a lot of cool things to read about the car.
Yep. Stay tuned, and shout out to Kevin on our team, who is a hardcore BMW fan and Steve Dinan fan, and he's living the dream right now with that car, so that's pretty cool. Well, thank you, everybody, and that wraps up today's episode of Only the Strong Survive. If you enjoyed this conversation, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, or share with your friends. And again, a big thanks to Steve Dinan of CarBahn for joining us. Until next time, take care.